with a lot of the talks that have been, that are on, I want to do something a bit different. I wanted to do something that maybe you hadn't thought about in a while or for a particular purpose. So I wanted to cover the whole idea of utilizing freelancers. So let me go through the slide deck and then I can start talking to those. Now, the first thing I'll just ask is, it's been a while since I've spoken to a large number of people without pajamas on. So please forgive me if I'm a little rusty giving these type of talks. So we'll see how we go. So what I wanted to cover off is this whole idea is, can you utilize freelancers to build software cheaply and effectively, right? Can you actually do it, right? And so I want to sort of go through my journey and what I've been able to achieve in terms of utilizing resources, the lessons that I've gone through, some of the things that you guys could, watch for, just so you've got, you might want to think about this. So let me start the slide deck. And let's go first page. All right. So the short answer is yes, you can build software cheaply and effectively. You'll find my slides are a bit verbose, but that's just to help out. So before I start, I just want to cover off a couple of things. First and foremost, the following what I'm going to talk about is based on my experience and my context. So of course it could be different for you. I'm going to sort of cover it as a bit of a story with some anecdotes and some advice and some other aspects in between. I do also say that the advice that I present is mine and mine alone. It doesn't represent any organizations that I've worked for or have worked for. I currently work for or worked for in the past, blah, blah, blah. You guys know all that kind of stuff. I'll also say that the context that you might experience might be different, right? You might have a different outcome. So again, fairly straightforward type stuff, but just thought I'd talk about that. The other thing I want to say is this talk is not about excluding existing development approaches in lieu of freelancers exclusively, right? What it's about is about, can it complement what you do, right? And so that's sort of the objective. So they're the kind of things I want to start with. The objectives of this talk, right, is I want you to come to realize that you have access to a worldwide pool of technical people that you can engage right now. And what I mean by that is, you could, at the start of this talk, put an ad up, and by the end of it, right, have 5, 10 people that have responded that potentially could do the work that you required, right? So it's really important that capability is so close. It is so accessible. I want you to realize that. If any of the mistakes that I've made you can avoid, that's a win, right? And at least, as a minimum, right, get those old home family videos, pay a video editor to chop them up, make them look delicious, right? Put them on your social media page and amaze your friends, right? As a minimum, right? If you can do that, I'd be really happy. Okay, so let me sort of talk about my freelance journey. Now, when I talk about freelancers, it's not me doing the work, but actually utilizing freelance resources. And I'll start off with a couple of things. One of the things that I don't like to do is to say no, right? And as a dev manager, CTO, or in a certain position, you always have requests upon your services to build something. And you end up building an art, it becomes an art form saying no. So whether it's you use prioritization, you use different tools, but we learn to say no, right? And we learn to say no because we don't have the resources to service all the requests upon us. I don't like that. I like to say yes. So for me, it's about, what can I do to say yes more often to actually get stuff built, right? And so I sort of came to this journey around potentially incorporating freelancers into my activities. So I'll start off with, I'm late to the party on this one. I usually am late to the party on most things. I didn't get into Seinfeld when it was on. I got into it after the fact. I didn't get into Firefly until after the fact. I think most people didn't get into Firefly until after the fact, but that's another story. I'm late to the party on this one. And I sort of, if you think about the journey, I think for me, the first insight was, you would have remembered many, many moons ago, there was a software developer got caught. He was outsourcing his entire work, right? And it was quite a famous story, right? And it was, the guy was, and this is the best part, he was their top performer, right? He was that good at being able to do it. It was a phenomenal thing, right? And I remember we had many discussions at work about, is this guy, bad, good, whatever. And my manager at the time just said, no, this is unacceptable. It's a breaking of trust. Whereas my opinion was this guy should be promoted, right? He's a bloody genius, right? He's been able to utilize the resources to do what's required of him. So that, that in the back of the mind, but it never really came to the fore. However, there was an incident a couple of years ago where a previous MD that I worked for turned up to me and said, Simon, I need something built, right? And I responded with the usual, saying, it's not a priority. I don't have the resources. There are more important things. And being a well-trained MD in the language of being told no, right, he actually went off and said, thanks, guys. That's cool. I'm happy with that. Then what he did is he independently wrote a spec. He found a freelancer. He got the work done. When it was complete, he gave it to us and said, look, before I finish the final milestone, can you just, check it out? I'll go, all right. Now, I had the expectation it was going to be absolute rubbish. It wasn't. It was really good. It was really good. And then when he told me how much it cost him, I'm going, we couldn't have done it for that price, right? And have that level of output, And it was sort of like, okay, now instead of panicking, thinking, oh no, we're all going to be turned into, we're going to be outsourced, we're all going to be done. For me, it was more around, okay, how can I use this to service my needs to say yes more often, right? And so that was sort of the awakening that I could have access to these resources that I could call upon at will, on demand, without some of the extra overheads that you would get with other types of resources that could get the job done. So for me, it was a revelation. But before I start, I want to talk about my personal journey around the freelance side of things. It's not always about you doing it for work, right? Far from it, right? I've actually utilized freelancers for my personal activities as well. So I've got many of my kids' birthdays videos edited and pushed up onto social media. So makes them look, pretty hot. We also, my auntie wrote a children's book, which I published, but I found an illustrator, right, who did all the drawings, the typesetting, the colorization for it at a price that is phenomenal, right? And the other one, which is the fun one, which is just about to come to completion, my grandfather had been telling stories that he was court-martialed and put in jail for a period of time for shooting an officer, right? Small offense. The officer lived, so that's okay. And so what we did is we actually engaged a researcher to go through and to engage with the Italian war, the war records, to actually find the transcript of the court-martial, right? Which we did. We actually got the original documents scanned and generated. They're currently being translated as we speak at the moment, but we were able to achieve something that we thought was impossible, right? We were able to find a researcher that spoke Italian, that understood how to navigate the Italian war archives, that could do everything that we're required to do. And again, it's that revelation that if you want to achieve something, you think you can't find the person, you're not looking hard enough. There is someone out there to do it. So whether you want to make your own book, whether you want to track down some family history or anything else, right? They are within reach at a cost-effective price, right? So that's the big sell that I'm trying to get at. Now, I don't work for any freelancing sites. I just found that this is a revelation to me, being able to have access to such unique resources so readily and so cheap. So let me still talk about my journey. So recently, and I'll talk about the freelancer developer journey, right? So I was given the opportunity to build a fintech from the ground up. So that's everything, the product, the site, the services, everything, right? And we sort of had some objectives, right? Obviously, we wanted to fail fast, and all these things as concepts should be relatively familiar to all you guys. We wanted to make sure if it wasn't going to work, then we all shake hands and go away, right? Not a problem at all. We wanted to build something that we could test the market, right? Is this financial product a suitable thing in the marketplace, right? We wanted to be flexible, adjust. And it became more apparent with COVID and the impact that had, that being flexible is paramount, right? We also understood that the future is unknown, right? And so this whole idea of, future proofing and all those type of things becomes less important, right? And I said it here, you know, spend only what is required, aka do it cheaply. So fundamentally, we don't have a huge reserve of funds to allocate to this. We only have a set amount, and we want to make sure we can achieve it, right? And then obviously once you get the business operational, then that can feed in and grow, and you know the usual things that small businesses need to be you know be realistic. So that was sort of the requirements. I explored the whole idea of bringing internal developers, right? And I've been corrupted by previous employers that have a strong demarcation between roles within development teams. And as a result, that means that, you know, before you even start, you need a minimum of like four guys, girls, whatever, to do it, you know, front end, back end, DevOps, that kind of stuff. All right. I'll talk more about that a bit later. But when you start adding that up, it adds up. Right. So that really didn't work for us for that initial stage anyway. The other thing is that we said, okay, why don't we look at, you know, development firms, organizations that could build it for us. And we looked for local and overseas. We got two responses. One was they'll do a fixed price piece of work, but that fixed price would have change requests that would send us, you know, to the wall, right? The other side were organizations that said, no, we'll only do time material, right? And rightly so, right? You know, so again, it's very hard to justify to the investors about a demonstrable deliverable when you're working on time material, or personally when I've seen the change request model really break organizations. So the question was, you know, why not use some freelancers? Why do we, you know, can we use freelancers at the level of stage that we were at to achieve what we wanted, right? So that was the path that we went down. Now, there's a lot of text on this slide deck, but what I wanted to just cover off is, like with anything, and it's more prevalent for freelancers, is you've got to design for success. In other words, and I am talking about the technical aspect of the system, right? And my first point is you are not only designing your system to work as intended, but also to actually be built, right? And what I've seen in the past is people will design these phenomenal architectures, beautiful architectures, right? But their resources or capabilities can't deliver on it, right? And so it's really important that when you build something, you've got to build it not just to service the need, but also it needs to be able to be executed, right? And that's an important part of, particularly when engaging freelancers, is that you have to understand that they are different in terms of how you present the work. So, and they'll become more detailed as we go through. So again, these things should be relatively common for all software development, I think anyway, and I'm probably, and knowing this audience, which is probably a top tier audience, that you would know this, right? So good, highly decoupled architecture is the key. The one thing I did find is building the components or mapping the components and the interactions at a high level of detail is an important part. But also to realize that when building your system, there are going to be sections of it that you will never allow freelancers to deal with, because these freelancers might be offshore, or this is your core IP, right? So when you build your system, when you design your system, you design it around these key components. So for example, you know, IP was security or complexity, or where the spec is unknown, right? And I describe them as you sort of try to isolate those, make them injectable components, right, that you can add in. So again, I would hope that these things are fairly standard for, you know, building systems. One thing I did a lot of was essentially building actual components. So you can surprisingly build RESTful interfaces and define interfaces, put like the Swagger UI over the top, use auto REST to build proxies to link things. You can do that pretty quickly and actually build something that actually feels a bit real, which is quite good. The other couple of things is working on making sure those components are discrete, standalone components. Again, I think I was corrupted by the sort of that Netflix model, which I they don't own the, the concept, but that individual components are looking after themselves, those type of things. But the other thing that I tried to do, right, was make the components as agnostic as possible, right, with moderations, of course. But I did it for two reasons, right? One is that communicating that sort of agnostic components becomes a lot easier. And I'll give an example, right? If I build a module that relates to sending and receiving of emails, right, it becomes an easy discussion with someone about what are the fundamental flows within that module. So you start to get that. But of course, you're not going to build for every scenario, but you're going to try to build it as agnostic as possible. The other thing then is that you ask the question, is there a product? Is there a SaaS product I can use instead, right? Is there something that I can buy instead of build? Because in certain situations, buying over building might be a better option, right? So again, this is the design aspect, but again, I think why these things are important is because when dealing with freelancers, where communication potentially can get fractured, it's really important that you have really, good specifications, or at least an ability to understand what you're trying to build. Of course, you're not going to get 100% on day one, but you want to be as close as possible, right? So that's sort of the objective. So when I designed the system, I sort of had this inkling I wanted to build for freelancers, and so I took some of these concepts into the design of it. Okay, so I've sort of got a design on one hand. I've got an idea of what I want to do. I've got to go find some people, right? How do I find these technical resources? So the first thing you do is you've got to post a job, right? And I've seen a lot of failure when people post jobs incorrectly. We have a spectacular advantage over everyone else when it comes to technical job posting, right? And that is that we speak the language of the developer, right? So it's really important that we utilize our skill to articulate exactly what we're after. So a couple of small little points, right? You've got to break the work into consumable sizes, right? So, whether that is, 2 weeks, 3 weeks of work at the max, small sizes, right? Sometimes smaller if you can, right? And you guys, more than anyone that smaller pieces of work have a better chance of succeeding, right? I sort of say if you can't describe what success looks like in 2 paragraphs, then it's too big, right? And what I'm talking about success is, what are you trying to achieve, right? Again, these are not unknown concepts, right? A couple of other things I do is I explicitly state the tech stack, right? And the reason why I do that is I found that a lot of people will just see work and respond shotgun style, right? So ensuring that you specify the stack sort of removes some of the, I put C# and some guy comes and says you got C skills. Come on, man, right? Let's try a little harder next time. The other thing is that if time zone is a critical aspect, right, you've got to state it, but also be prepared for people to ignore it, right? And so in certain work models, time zone is really important to me, but in other times it's not. And obviously it reduces the number of candidates that you can have. English language skills are important. Also state that. And I've found that most people are very upfront about their skill level. If, for example, the work is one where it's where you require a lot of interaction, then that might be an important aspect. State it up front. Don't get caught short dealing with the issue later on. One of the things that I don't like doing, and this is personal, so I apologize if I accidentally offend anyone. Don't advertise for full stack resources. I see it as being a bit lazy, right? In other words, you just want someone to do it all, right? So maybe think about the kind of work that you're doing, right? And whether you can, do that. I also find you're asked for trouble, right? What I've found with a lot of the resources that are claimed to be full stack, they will be C# that knew jQuery a couple of years ago, right? And so what you end up having is, I sort of describe this scenario where you get the tradesperson rather than the craft person, right? And that's a personal approach that I have, is that I prefer people that just focus on a particular discipline and that they focus on that and they're very best at it. And I will make sure my architecture works around that in some respects. I'm not a great fan of, someone that could do it all, because I usually find that they can do one thing very well, they do something a bit average. So I want the best of everything. So, I want that craftsman over the tradesman. So that's why I personally avoid the concept of the full stack developer. Now, that's not to say that some of you guys are fabulously expert in one or the other. It's just an experience that I'd come across. The other thing is, don't be afraid to ask for examples of work, particularly if the work has a creative aspect. So what I find is with a lot of front-end developers, right, I actually would like to see what they've done. I want to see their detail, right, their ability to complete the work and have that finesse that will be your public website. And what you'll find is that they're generally very open to share, right? So that's sort of how I'd structure that. Now, again, us being technical people means we can write this in a technical way, which means that the technical people on the other end can review it and make an appropriate decision whether they want to pursue it or not. So we actually have a spectacular advantage over non-technical people trying to get technical work done. All right, okay, budgeting, right? How much, right? Really important question. Freelance doesn't always mean cheaper, right? And that's the most important thing, right? You can make it as expensive or as cheaply as you like. It's up to you, right? Now, of course, there's going to be, implications of going one way or the other. The key, I think, is finding what is your budget, right, for the nature of the work that you want to do. If you consider it critical, then you might want to increase the budget to find maybe a better type of developer out there, right? If it's something that is, relatively straightforward, you might want to decrease it. Again, it's a big part of you being a technical person, realizing that this is a slider that you can slide. Now, generally there are two models, hourly rates and fixed, right? Pretty straightforward. Look, my general rule, which is fixed cost for work that's well-defined, hourly when it's more ad hoc or it's unspec'd, right? That's sort of the model that's worked fairly well for me. One of the things I'll do is that with my fixed cost work, I'll define it pretty strongly. I'll probably even give them skeleton code, that type of stuff. So it becomes pretty straightforward. The question then is how much, particularly on a fixed cost side of things, on a hourly rate. A lot of the freelancing tools will actually have an average cost. So for example, you put in a couple of keywords, C# developer, backend, blah, 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 and it will actually say the average cost is $15 an hour, US, something like that. So again, utilize those tools to help you if you're struggling. Now, the other thing, don't be afraid to try to lower price and see what kind of responses you get back. If they're no good, just bump the price up again, right? That's something that I've done. I opened with some, ridiculous low prices. I got no one, or the quality of the candidates there was a lot of phishing candidates. Then I realized I had to bump it up, right? So again, you can use the market mechanism to work out exactly whereabouts your work fits. And again, use your skill as a technical person to grade the work and to actually determine its complexity and sort of factor in a cost, right? And this is, as a technical person, our greatest advantage, right? So don't see freelancers as negating essentially either a permanent staff or whatever the case may be. Quite the opposite. You can use your capability to give you the capacity to deliver more, right? That's how you should be looking at this particular problem set. All right. We've posted the job, we've posted the budget. Okay. It's not uncommon to receive 10 to 20 interest requests per day, right? One of my jobs, I had to carve back 100, right? There's plenty of people out there that will be interested in your work. Plenty of people out there. The problem is, are you interested in them? So let's talk about the freelancers very, very quickly. And this is sort of a loose description of the type of freelancers you're going to deal with. You're going to get your permanent freelancers. So these are the people that are making a living 9 to 5 doing freelancing work, right? They decide they're not working for the man anymore. They're picking and choosing jobs, and that's what they do. Very common in a lot of the creative works. I find it is less common in some of the technical side of things, but they do exist. And I'm using one of those right now. You'll also get the part-timers. So these are the really smart guys and girls that have a job. They work 9 to 5, but they want to make a little bit of extra money on the side and do some out-of-hours activities, right? So, they can give you a couple of hours per night and they'll give you a day on the weekend, those type of things. Again, the nature of your work will determine which type of person you'd want to engage with. The third type is what I describe as agencies, right? So generally agencies fall into 2 categories, sort of a loose collection of individuals that decide that they can work better together, or an actual legitimate organization that is using these mechanisms to fish for work, right? So they're the kind of things. Now, in a lot of freelancer sites, they'll actually explicitly state they're an agency. You'll actually see that. There are a couple other giveaway signs as well. I'll talk a little bit why I'm not a fan of agencies. But yeah, so they're generally the 3 types. There are obviously variations to that, but you can sort of broadly categorize them into that. And the reason you want to categorize them in is the nature of the work that you want complete, right? If it's time sensitive, then you might want more of that permanent activity. If it's something that's less time sensitive that you could just have done in the next week or 2, then you might want to go down that part-time resource. So there's a whole manner of different reasons you would choose, but again, just use your common sense to pick. So you get all these responses, you're going to get bombarded, right? And it's just going to be like, how am I going to get all this sorted, right? You'll generally find 4 types of responses, right? You'll find the automated response, right? So you post an ad, you'll get a response in a couple of minutes, right? And these are generally, I'm interested. So someone set up if it sees the word C#, send me a response, right? I find most of these are essentially agencies, which are essentially organizations. Not really a big fan, right? It means they haven't read your work. They're looking for keywords. It's probably not the kind of level of effort that I want in that response. You'll also get I haven't done it directly, but I think I can, right? So these are the kind of people that would say, all right, so you push up something like, for example, I want to build an API against a particular SaaS product. I'm looking for someone who's done that before, right? They'll come back and say, well, I haven't done it against that API, but I've done it against this API. It's all the same, all right? Yeah, watch those. But they potentially could be little gold mines as well. So that's something to be mindful of that. You'll get the people that say, yeah, I've done it before. Here's my portfolio. Fantastic, right? They're your top tier candidates that you would want to invest more. Then you'll get the whole, can we talk about this more? Can we have a phone call? Again, I find these are mostly agencies, and the responses are mostly by a business development officer for an organization. And the reason they want to talk more is because they want to, engage and see if it's worth their time, right? And I've had many discussions, and they don't go anywhere. You might have a different experience, but for me, it's something that hasn't worked. So you've got all these responses. You can start to filter out the ones that you're interested in. So with your responses, for me, personalized responses are the key. I like the ones that actually someone's read the work, right? I think that shows that for me is a little bit more respectful. It works for me. If they provide a portfolio, right, that's great. Shows pride, confidence in their work. Love it. And any of the sort of the phishing and the automated ones, I don't want to spend too much time on, because if I'm getting 10 to 20 a day, I haven't got that much time to filter through those, right? So really for me, it's about finding the right candidate. Ratings, and I'll talk about ratings, are really important for freelancers, particularly. So look for lots of your 4s and your 5s. However, I'm not put off by seeing a couple of 1s, right? And the reason is because, as I said, shit happens, right? And we've all been involved in projects where they go belly up for no particular reason, and in particular, no particular fault of, say, the developer. It's another scenario. So it's something to be a bit mindful, is just realize that, yeah, things can go pear-shaped for some of these guys. It doesn't mean they're terrible, right? It actually just means they're probably they've just had a bad experience. So again, tread wisely, use a bit of common sense, put yourself in their shoes as technical people that have experienced success and failure for building systems. The other thing that a lot of systems will have was how much they've earned, right? So they'll say, we've made over 100K, right? Or I've done 5K of work or something like that, right? For me, that's less of an important criteria. What I've found is that some freelancers are just starting out and they got nothing, right? So, it doesn't mean anything. And also for me, if you've got 100K, right, generally it probably means you're an agency. And again, that's a red flag for me. Now, for me, I say no to agencies. I do it for a couple of reasons. One is potentially change the resources mid-project, right? So the candidates they put forward might not be the ones doing the work. So they send out the really, the top person, and then next thing you know, that's not the person that's working on it. I know all consulting companies do that, but that's the way it is. I also find they generally claim they can do everything, and then when you push them, they sort of can't. And look, and as I said, being an old crusty dev manager, I actually want to deal with the people that are actually writing the code, and that's me, right? So that's no other, that's just how it is. Cool. So we've started to sort through the responses. Okay. How do I get through these 100? Well, there's generally hard no's. You can pick the hard no's. If any of you guys have done any kind of work around resume filtering, you sort of follow this same approach, right? You've got hard no's, take them out the pile. You have a maybe list. You do then a second round with that maybe list where you'll send up some follow-up questions. I usually will send up some follow-up questions. I also will confirm that they're comfortable with the requirements that I've sent them, right? In terms of, are you sure you can do this, right? If I want to see some examples, say they didn't supply it on the initial response, I'll ask to see something. A couple of other things is I'll also double confirm availability, time commitments, and any other housekeeping. Can they work these hours, right? Can they, what is their commitment on a per daily basis? What, those type of things, right? Again, because they might not have been initially honest on that initial response. And give them a call, right? I'll chat to many of them. Get them to do a demo, get them to have a chat, see how your relationship goes. It's just like any kind of, recruitment process. Now, the other thing, don't just select one, select many, right? If the nature of the work is such that it's relatively small, it's not overly costly, then just to guarantee a bit more success, have multiple running at the same time, right? And then see which one produces the best code and use that one, right? Don't be afraid to have multiple activities happening and have a bit of redundancy. All right, so we've found some people. We're going to start, okay? How do we manage and monitor this, right? How do we keep an eye on it? And this is a rather long slide deck, but I'll take you through it. Firstly, freelance sites provide generally 3 types of services that you will utilize to help with your monitoring and managing, right? The first one is this financial escrow service, and I'll talk a bit more around that. Essentially, the money, right? Where does it go, right? The problem I have is that these escrow services are great, right? Because they're better than you paying some dodgy PayPal account or something like that, right? They allow a level of management associated with that. They'll also have milestone management as well. So in other words, the different steps within the work, and I'll talk more about that. They also provide monitoring tools, and I'll talk a bit some of the screen grabby tools that they provide. It's actually quite nice and sophisticated. Be mindful that a lot of their fees are quite high. They'll take a hit on your side, and the freelancer will take a hit. But the fact that they provide handy services, everything goes bad, right, is a really really important service. So I'll start off with the escrow side of things. What we do is you generally set up milestones. You allocate funds to that. They're held in escrow. In other words, they're held by the freelancer site. When both parties are happy, then the money is released, right? So that's something to be mindful of. Essentially, that there's a third party that sits in between. In a lot of sites, they can act as adjudicator if you're unhappy with what was being delivered. But I always like the whole idea is let's focus on being successful rather than it failing, right? And trying to get a good result. So we'll talk more about how we can do that. But I've never had to go to an adjudication, right, for any of my pieces of work. Generally, the contractor and myself, if it didn't work out, will come to an agreement, right, which will be acceptable to both of us. So that's where you need to be. Your milestones, as I said, logical steps. What I've found when creating milestones, there's generally a set number of milestones that you would create. One is that onboarding, right? Making sure they understand the system, learning, understanding the nuances of what I'm trying to do. I'll usually get them to do a Hello World app. In other words, the first deliverable, just to show they're doing. Then there's the core functionality, bug fixes, and the teardown, right? So when I sort of structure my milestones, I sort of structure it on that. But there is no formula for how much I would allocate for each, right? I sort of use my experience to work out the quantum. So, it might be the onboarding, the learning might be straightforward. The Hello World might be straightforward, but the core functionality is the bigger component. So that's basically about it. Okay, monitoring, right? So experience, and this is just again from experience, own the deliverable, right? So in other words, they're delivering code. So get them to put it into your repo, right? So set that all up. Push them on that and say, yep, you got to deliver it. Now, they might want to work on their own repo and do intermediate pushes, fine. But fundamentally, you have to keep it in your repo. It gives you a great way to monitor what's going on, monitor the quality of the code. If you can get them around to do pull requests, fantastic, right? That's what you're after. The other thing is that a lot of freelance sites provide screen grabbers, right? So in other words, what they do is, particularly with the time and material model, what happens is it takes a periodical screen grab of your site, right? So you can go and look at the screen grabs and make sure they've got Visual Studio open, right? That there's a progression that's taking place. Have I used it? No, right? Do I feel comfortable that I know it's there? Yes, right? So it's one of those things that you can actually, do that. Now, could they circumvent that and just have Visual Studio running in the background on a screen and they put the screen grabber around that? Of course they can, right? But you have other mechanisms to determine if they are delivering, right? And of course, periodically review their work. I mean, that's like with anything. And look, it's really important. If you're not seeing an output, shut it down. It's done. End the contract early, right? If you're not seeing the deliverables, end it early. I've ended contracts within 2 days because either contractors realized they bit off more than they can chew, or I just felt they weren't getting it. It's okay. It's not a problem. You enter an agreement. You have a good talk with the contractor, and you'd be okay. And we all move on, and lesson learned. So you've got ways to manage all that kind of stuff. When the milestones are complete, make sure you've got a copy of all the artifacts, right? Make sure that you can drive the system and you understand how it works, right? That is absolutely a fundamental thing. You've got to make sure that transition happens, right? And partly because there might not be a recourse after the milestones are complete to go back to that person. So you need to be prepared for that. When the project ends, right, shake hands, money gets transferred. We say we love you, thank you for your work, all that kind of stuff. Freelancers really obsess over good reviews, right? It's a big thing. So reward them. If they've done well, reward them with a good review, right? And that is for them, a quality review will also bring in more work for them. And they're very touchy about, if something, and I've had a couple where they just haven't gone very well, and we've had discussions around what I should put in the review. So that's something to be very mindful of. The other thing is they review you, right? And so when freelancers are looking at your job ads, they'll see, what is the relationship you've had with previous freelancers, right? And of course, good reviews are good because it just means that you're more likely to get good quality candidates that want to work with so good quality people, right? So it's all good. So you sort of got that happening there. And so the project ends, you've got your deliverable, we've all moved on. So look, a couple of just experiences. I'm coming towards the end. A couple of experience side of things. One is be prepared for projects to fail. Budget for it, right? Try to catch it early. Don't just go, here you go do the work, come back when it's done. Actively involved. You should do that anyway, regardless if it's a freelancer or not. Have a backup plan, right? That backup plan might be potentially other freelancers to do the work, or it might be actually concurrently having a freelancer do the work, right? I've had projects which were critical and I had 2 people working on it simultaneously, right? The great part about that is I got 2 solutions and I was able to, deliver a sort of a mix that allowed for a spectacular, piece of software, but at least I had peace of mind knowing that if one went down, I still had another, right? So, and if the cost is right and the scale of it is right, then it's not a great expense. And again, keep your expenses small. So if it does fail, you're not breaking the bank, right? And I think that's probably, that's up there. I found with English language skills, now, one would argue that English is not my first language, even though I don't have a second. But one of the things is that when you require discussions around requirements, dialogue is important. Make sure that works for you. All right. What I found though is when dealing with freelancers, strong requirements, small time frames to completion, and success can be measured easily. What is the success for this component? So that's sort of the journey that I've gone through in regards to the freelancer path. What I really want from you guys, I think I'm up to the questions page. What I really want from you guys is to think about how you can say yes more, right? And that might be temporarily supplementing your lack of resources, right, with potentially a freelance capability, right? And it might be, for example, offloading a lot of work on your offloading work that maybe one of your permanents would have done, so they can concentrate on IP, or it might be, that there is a piece of work that would be suited to be done in that freelancer model. It just gives you a capability you might not have had. If you are unsure about that, before you go to your boss at work and say, "Can I have a budget allocated for freelance?" Go do it yourself. Go get that video done, right, of your kid's birthday party. Go and get your wife's website done, which I haven't got done yet, my one. That's another story. So, do those type of things and investigate the platform and see how it can complement you so you could be saying yes more than no. So, Alex, that's pretty much it. I'll work through the questions.
So you haven't got any in the chat right now.
Oh, fantastic. That's even better.
If you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll put them to Simon. I guess the question I had is, do you have any recommendations of sites? I know there's a lot of different ones, but
yeah,
what are your favorites? And
look, personally, because I've built up a rapport on Upworks, I use Upworks quite a lot. What I find is that you'll find that, and I've done this, freelancers will probably have will have something in each of the major platforms. Upworks works pretty well. Functionally, it services what I need. The other thing which I've found is that there is restrictions on things like PayPal in certain countries. So what that means is that if you wanted to pay freelancers outside of the Upworks model, you can't do it, right? You have to use different tools, whether it's Swift or all that kind of stuff. Whereas what I've found is that from places like Upworks, they generally have a financial transaction mechanism that works in a lot of regions that potentially you can't directly transfer into. So it's a nice way of actually interacting or managing the financial side without having to deal with basically cross-border financial transactions. So that's something that I've sort of recently come across.
And how on earth did you find someone capable of searching Italian war archives? That's quite specialist.
I wrote, "We're after someone to search the Italian war archives." Done, right? And that's the point. And that is that there is someone out there that can do what you want them to do. You've just got to get out there, right? And yes, we were very lucky. She's she's an awesome researcher, and we've been able to track it down. And just to give you an idea, he didn't shoot an officer. His gun accidentally fired and put a slug in someone's backside, right? That's pretty much what we believe took place due to a faulty weapon. We're still waiting for the full translation. So the story might not have been as big as we initially thought, but it is, it's great to have clarity.
It's a good story. Does anyone have a question for Simon? Otherwise, we will wrap up there.
You were talking about, it sounded like slices. So instead of someone doing the full stack, you would get freelancers to do like a slice.
Yes.
Does that mean you have as people internally or other freelancers doing the rest of the stack? How does that work?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things, right? And it's sort of a temporal thing, and that is that when I initially built the system, I created some slices that need to be built from an architectural point of view. And again, focusing on that agnostic approach, I was able to find people that were tailor-made to build. So for example, I've built a entire CQRS backed, CQRS event store backed system with event notifications and redundancy. So I got someone to build that infrastructure for me, which I build everything on top of that. So we have that side of it. Then we have sort of different services that different people work on, right? And they will work, for example, just on the basically RESTful layer and below, right? And then from like a UI, I'll have an Angular specialist working upwards. So I have a strong contract definition between the two layers and allow people to work backwards and forwards. Now, again, it came down to strong specifications up front, which is something that I was able to put together. Tweaks where I need to tweak, of course, but it's, again, keeping people relatively siloed and focusing on their area of expertise. So yes, I do the vertical and I do the horizontal, depending on the, and depending on the nature of work, will be depending on the freelancer that I engage with.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Would you have an estimate, and I guess it varies depending on what people are working on, the percentage-wise maybe that you may have saved over traditional approaches? Or?
No. And the only reason that I probably haven't tracked it as well enough, but it's probably worth an investigation, but I know it's substantially less.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's substantially less. So to achieve what we need to achieve. But again, like with any kind of requirements, it would be an unfair metric to compare something that we designed, a year ago to what we have now, because everything's moved. Sure. So, but yes, it meant that we were able to build what we needed to build within the context of the resources, financial resources at that particular time.
I've had a good experience myself with some of these sites with, especially around graphic elements that
absolutely
people have been very, very good, and I've wanted for demos and just to create that extra polish to presentations. That's worked quite well for me if I'm putting together a training course or something.
Absolutely. I was contemplating getting my slide deck done, so putting it up there and actually getting someone to rework it, but I ran out of time. So that was just something. So that artwork is just all, design ideas in PowerPoint, so nothing special there.
No worries.
Excellent.
Well, look, thank you very much for spending your time with us today, and I hope everyone has a really good Christmas, and we'll be back in the new year.
Excellent, Alex. Thank you again, and happy Christmas to all you guys out there.
Thanks, everyone.